All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining. We're going to jump in and get started. We have a lot of ground to cover today. Welcome. Thank you for joining us for Policy Palooza. My name's Abby Cohen. I am the Director of Partnerships here at DC Public Schools. Today's session is being recorded, and we'll share a copy of the deck and the recording early next week. As we always do, it will also be posted to our website so that you can easily find it. A little bit of housekeeping before we start. Please feel free to put any questions that you might have in the Q&A box. The chat has been disabled, so Q&A is the best way to get your questions to us. We will do our best to answer as we go, but have also left time at the end to answer questions specifically. And then closed captioning is also available for today's session under the More menu at the top of your screen. It's listed under, if you click More, and then under Language and Speech, you'll see the option to turn on closed captions. So our agenda today is pretty straightforward. We're going to start with a review of our objectives for the training, a refresher on our team and who you're hearing from today. We're going to do a brief overview of the requirements for school program providers, and then spend most of our time talking about the policies and procedures for once you are working with DCPS schools. We have a little preview of our summer building use information, and then, as always, want to share information on our systems and resources and how you can contact us. So the main objective for today's session is to provide our partners with a better understanding of the operational requirements for being a DCPS partner. These are processes that we require all partners to follow and implement while serving our students. They are typically outlined in our memorandum of agreement, but then also communicated through trainings like this. We will do a quick review at the beginning of the onboarding requirements if you're a new partner and you're still working to identify a school who you want to work with. But really the focus today are on those operational requirements for once you have begun actively providing programming to DCPS students. We are going to cover a lot today. If you've attended this training before, you know we pack a lot in, but we have designed this deck to be a resource that you can reference and hope you'll use it like a handbook, something you can refer back to as different things come up over the course of the school year. So next, I just want to introduce you to the team. As I mentioned, I'm Abby. I'm the Director of Partnerships, and I lead the DCPS Partnerships team, which includes my teammate, Katie Williams, our Coordinator for Partnerships and Donations, as well as our Chief, Kira Tyler, who leads our broader Office of External Affairs. And so with that, I'm going to pass it off to Katie to do our review of school program provider requirements.
Great, thanks, Abby. So I'm going to do just a quick review of our onboarding requirements for partners. There is a part 1 of this training, which we will link here, that goes over all of these requirements in more depth. But just as an overview, when we say school program provider or SPP, what we're referring to is an organization that provides its own programming to DCPS students, works with students 3 or more times per school year, and is not a health or mental health provider. Those providers go through a separate vetting process with our school mental health and health services teams. So examples of SPPs might include programs like tutoring programs, mentoring programs, aftercare providers, dance class providers, general enrichment programming. SPPs would not include organizations that are just offering field trip opportunities, volunteer groups coming under DCPS-led programming, dental health providers, or curriculum vendors. So because school program providers work so closely with DCPS and our students, there are policies and procedures that they must follow to protect themselves or students in the district. So this is an overview of the 6 main requirements for SPPs, which I'll explain in more detail in the next slides. So the first step to becoming an SPP is registering in our database. This registration allows your organization to share more information with schools about your programming, while also ensuring you're aware of our policies and procedures before moving forward with working with the district. Additionally, this is how we collect contact information for our partners to communicate key updates from our office via email and our newsletter. This registration is confirmed annually in order to stay active in our database. And it's important to note that being registered in our database is not a green light to begin programming. There are additional requirements you must complete, which I'm going to go into next. So if you haven't already identified a school or central services program team to partner with, here are some tips on how to get started. Really, you can email a principal. We have links on our website to each school's page and their comprehensive school plan, so you can learn more about their priorities for the school year. You can also reach out to us or explore other central services content teams that might make sense to partner with. So the longest piece of these steps is the agreement piece. So in short, all SPPs must have some form of DCPS agreement in place before services begin. For SPPs who do not charge DCPS directly for services, you are required to have a memorandum of agreement. You can check our partnerships database to see whether there's one on file and its expiration date. If you do need a copy of that, you can always reach out to our team. If you charge DCPS directly for services, you will need a purchase order with the individual school you're working with. And you can check the DC vendor portal or contact your school or central services point of contact for confirmation of your purchase order. Please note that any services rendered before a PO is executed may not be paid out. So it's very important to have that purchase order and memorandum of agreement prior to services beginning. If you are a new SPP or unsure whether you need an MOA or a purchase order, you can reach out to us and we can help you make that determination. I just really want to emphasize how important it is to have this formal agreement in place before programming begins. If we do become aware of an organization operating that does not have an agreement in place, programming could be paused while the agreement is executed. And that's also important because it can take quite some time to execute the agreements. Sometimes it takes upwards of 90 days to finalize. So if you need your MOA or if your MOA is set to expire soon, please begin that process as soon as possible. Another important note is that principals are not allowed to sign agreements with school program providers. For MOAs, those must be signed by the chancellor, and for purchase orders, those have to be issued by the DCPS contracting officer. Even more critical is ensuring that all your staff and volunteers have been cleared through DCPS before services begin. So this is an overview of the clearance process for both volunteers and contractors. The only difference here is the drug test, which is a requirement for contractors and not volunteers. The distinction between the two are contractors are individuals that are paid for their services that can either be paid directly by DCPS or paid by the partner organization, while volunteers are unpaid. Please note that DCPS does not accept any clearances from other entities or organization. This includes other DC government agencies, including DCHR. All staff and volunteers must complete the DCPS clearance process before beginning services and must maintain active clearances for the duration of their work. And in case that's not clear, just re-emphasizing how important it is to have a process in place to confirm that your volunteers and staff members are cleared through the DCPS clearance process. They will receive DCPS clearance letters, or you can confirm with our DCPS clearance team. It's important not to just take people's words for it and to have that official confirmation. Failure to enforce this requirement could result in program disruptions or MOA termination. So it's very, very critical that this step is complete. The next step, if you are operating in a building outside of regular instructional hours, you must work with your school and the Realty office at the Department of General Services to submit an application to use facilities. If you operate at multiple DCPS schools, you must have a building use agreement on file for each site. So these signed applications must be submitted to the Department of General Services at least 20 business days before the start of services, with the exception of summer. Given the number of applications that are being processed during the summer, that deadline is longer than 20 business days. For this summer, the building use deadline is April 24th. Abby's going to talk a little bit more about the summer building use process later in this presentation, and we'll have an information session in February. So we know those are a lot of requirements. Here's an overview of all of them. I'll leave this up for a minute so you can screenshot that. It is also available on our website. I will drop the link in the chat. We do have a checklist that school program providers can use while they're going through this process to make sure that everything is complete. So I'll drop that link and I'm going to hand it back over to Abby to dig into some additional policies.
Thanks, Katie. RJ, I see you have a hand up. If you can put your question in the chat, we will be able to answer it there. Thank you so much. Okay, so now we're going to start digging into DCPS's operational policies and procedures. We're going to cover three main areas today. One bucket will be focused on student safety, one bucket focused on equitable access to programming, and then our third and final bucket will cover data requests and hosting events. All right, so first on our student safety section is mandated reporter training. So as people and organizations who work with students, we are all considered mandated reporters. All program staff must take DC's Child and Family Services Agency's virtual mandated reporter training. We also strongly recommend that volunteers also complete this training, which is linked on this slide. So what are we mandated to report? As mandated reporters, it is not our job to decide whether an accusation is founded. Our job is to report any instance of suspected or reported neglect or abuse, and then the professionals at CFSA and MPD will take over to do their investigation. You cannot get in trouble for making a good faith report. This is such a critical safeguard for ensuring that our students and families get the supports that they need. So on the screen, you'll see a list of different types of incidents that should be reported, but you'll learn more about that as well as what the whole process looks like when you complete the training. Relatedly, for incident reports, it is critical that we have documentation of any incidents that occur regarding the behavior, safety, or health of any DCPS student or provider personnel. This ensures that the proper protocols are followed and that students, families, and staff receive the communications and supports that they need. We have also had instances where a family might file a grievance several weeks or months later, and so it has been hugely important that we have that proper documentation so that we can effectively respond and support in those instances. So if an incident occurs during your programming, if it involves suspected abuse or neglect of a child, you immediately follow your mandated reporter requirements, which is to report it to CFSA, Metropolitan Police Department, which you can do so by notifying your school's resource officer or by calling MPD's Youth Division. You alert the school-based point of contact that you work with. So typically that's the principal or the assistant principal or the MSL or DSL. And then you would submit that report via our incident reporting form. And then lastly, alert the point of contact in your DCPS agreement. That is most typically going to be our team. But if you are working with a particular content team, another team here at Central Services, you would want to make sure they are notified as well. So when we receive the report, we will reach back out. We will follow up with the school and the provider, making sure that the school has been made aware, confirming what steps have been taken to address whatever incident occurred. And then sometimes we will loop in additional central services teams to provide supports to the school or to the student as needed. So what to report and when? We often get a lot of questions about what should I be reporting and when should I report it. So what we want to do is share the same guidance that our schools receive so that you can hopefully help align how you approach reporting incidents with how our schools are thinking about that in regards to incidents that might happen during the school day. This is certainly not an exhaustive list, but hopefully provides some clarity on how we think about incidents of differing levels of severity. Tier 1 incidents, we would expect immediate reporting first to MPD or fire EMS if it's a true emergency. And then you should notify the school principal and then our team. And then for tier 2 incidents, we would expect those to be reported within 24 to 48 hours following the steps outlined on slide 21. This is just a snapshot of what the incident report form looks like. You can access it through the partnerships database. It might be a little bit hard to see here, but you're just entering sort of the basic details of what happened, the initials of the student, what grade they're in, what happened, so describing the incident, and as well as next steps that have already been taken. And then you are also able to check off, if relevant, have you called CFSA, MPD? If you know that the school submitted their own incident report, you would document that here as well. We also receive questions pretty frequently about the intersection between discipline policies and special education accommodations. We're going to talk a little bit more about our accommodation process a bit later in the presentation. But in terms of student discipline, it is important that our school program providers have a written discipline policy that is shared with families so that from the very beginning of programming, families understand how your organization handles student behavior incidents, especially if there's a recurring issue, how you approach that. The same behavior expectations and discipline procedures can apply to students with individualized education plans, Section 504 plans, or to a student who has a suspected disability, even if it's not formally documented. But you do need to make sure that reasonable accommodations are being implemented. So the accommodation request process exists exactly for that purpose, and that process must be exhausted before a student can be permanently removed from the program for the current school year. We also want to make sure that if there are incidents that have occurred that sort of activate your discipline policy. So let's say, for example, you have a 3-strike rule and a student commits an infraction that is their first strike, so to speak. We want to make sure that an incident report is filed for that incident so that if we do get to the point of having a discussion around accommodations, we have the appropriate information for understanding, sort of the historical context for how we got to that point. And then lastly, if a student is permanently removed from the program, they must have the opportunity to rejoin that program the following school year. All right, switching gears a little bit, the DCPS field trip policy, just wanted to highlight a couple reminders. The full policy is linked on this slide, so I encourage you to review it if your organization plans to or already offers field trips. A couple highlights. First, this policy applies to DCPS sponsored field trips. So those are any trips that meet any of the following criteria. First is that the trip is planned in any part by a DCPS employee acting in their DCPS capacity or during their DCPS tour of duty. Second, the trip takes place during the school day, or the trip is funded in any way by DCPS, including money that was donated directly to DCPS or money collected from students by DCPS. So as soon as you check one of those boxes, your field trip is now considered DCPS sponsored and you are held to the official DCPS field trip policy. DCPS sponsored trips must use a DCPS approved transportation vendor, regardless of who pays for that transportation. And if you need the list of approved vendors, that is something we can easily share. Parents cannot serve as chaperones on overnight or international field trips. And then, of course, you would continue to follow any field trip requirements that were outlined in your DCPS memorandum of agreement or contract. DCPS employee can plan a non-DCPS sponsored field trip, but there is a process that they must go through, which is outlined on page 9 of the policy. And one other thing I want to say is that if your trip is considered DCPS sponsored, there is a formal approval process that the school initiates. So just make sure that as you begin having those conversations with the school, as soon as it's determined that this is considered DCPS sponsored, that they've identified the person who's going to be entering that into the field trip app and pushing the trip through for formal approval. So that approval process is outlined here. This is just a snapshot of how long you could expect or who is giving that formal approval depending on what type of field trip it is. In terms of student transportation for a DCPS sponsored field trip, students can never be transported in a personal vehicle, either operated by a DCPS or partner, staff, or volunteer. We are never allowed to use 15-passenger vans, ride-sharing services, or a parent's personal vehicle, even if they're wanting to transport their own student. If you are operating a non-DCPS sponsored field trip, the things you should know about transportation is that you need to make sure that whatever mode of transportation you are using for that trip is included and detailed on the consent form so that families have those details at the time of signing. Ensure that the transportation company you're working with are vetted, and then of course continue to follow the field trip requirements outlined in your DCPS agreement. Lastly, in the student safety category is DCPS's elevated risk policy. As a district, we want to ensure that students have access to joyful learning experiences, but also need to ensure that students are safe and not engaging in risky activities. So that is what this policy speaks to. So for any event hosted on DCPS property, inflatable attractions that students jump on or climb on are not permitted under any circumstances. So this includes, but is not limited to, things like bounce houses or obstacle courses. Inflatable attractions that students do not jump or climb on, like an inflatable basketball setup, are permitted, provided they comply with the insurance requirements that are outlined in the policy. And then this last bullet shares a few highlights of the process for obtaining any of the permitted elevated risk attractions. And so if you have any questions, we've also linked the full policy here, but we are also happy to answer questions directly. We have supported partners in getting these approvals for things that are considered elevated risk, but still allowed. So the process is possible and doable, and we're here to support if that becomes necessary. All right, so moving on to our equitable program access section. The first thing I want to talk about is our before and after school accommodation request process. So this is a process that we launched a few years ago to ensure that we are able to review and determine on an individualized basis accommodation requests regarding after school programming. So students with a qualified disability must be afforded an equal opportunity to participate in extracurricular activities and athletics as their non-disabled peers. So while the entirety of a student's 504 plan or IEP does not need to be implemented during extracurricular activities, students do have a right to receive any reasonable accommodations that they need in order to participate in either DCPS run or DCPS sponsored extracurricular activities, provided that that accommodation does not substantially alter the program or provide undue hardship. So as I mentioned, to support this, DCPS does have an accommodation request process to ensure that we are able to evaluate all requests on an individualized basis. So it's a pretty straightforward process. If a student or a family requests an accommodation, you would submit it through the DCPS Partnerships Accommodation Request Form, which is also available in the Partnerships database. You do not need to be logged into the database in order to access the form, but you would click into the form, enter the requested information about your organization and the details of the request. And then once you submit that, my team is notified, we review it, and we will follow up to schedule an initial meeting with your team, the school team, and then other central services staff who support this process. This is a snapshot of what the form looks like. It doesn't look dissimilar to the incident report form, but it's just how we capture that core information and ensure that we are initiating the process when necessary. Next is administration of medication. So the administration of medication for qualifying students is considered a reasonable accommodation that must be provided. Staff cannot administer any medication to minors without first completing DC Health's administration of medication or AOM training. So if a qualifying student who needs support taking medication is interested or enrolling in your program, please reach out to my team and we can get you set up for the next AOM training so that we can ensure that staff are certified and this support can be provided. In terms of language access, DCPS is very committed to serving students and families from diverse languages and backgrounds and strives to give families information in a language that they understand to ensure equitable access to programming. So any organization that contracts with the district and interacts with the public is required to comply with the DC Language Access Act. We have several resources on our website and best practices that have been shared by our language acquisition division. So encourage partners to explore that and let us know if you have any questions. We also want to make sure that you're aware of Language Line, which is free telephonic interpretation. The Language Access Unit supports our partners' interpretation needs by providing access to the Language Line, which is a contracted service that offers telephonic interpretation in over 240 languages. It's very easy to use. You call the 1-800 number, you enter this DCPS client ID, select the language that you need, tell the interpreter the name of the school that you're calling from, and then an interpreter will come on the line to help you. If you have any other questions or a specific need, I want to make sure you have contact information for our language access unit. Claudette Monroy is the manager on the team. She's wonderfully responsive, so please feel free to reach out to her. You can always reach out to us as well, but we will probably, our first step will be connecting you with Claudette. And then last but not least in this section, wanting to make sure folks are aware of OSSE's licensure process. So the Office of the State Superintendent of Education oversees childcare facility licensure. This process is required of any organization that operates before and after care out of the same non-DCPS building, or of any organization that wants to accept childcare subsidy vouchers to help offset the cost of programming for qualifying families. So this process is most relevant for organizations who are charging families to enroll. And I want to note that beginning in October 2024, programs that have a valid DCPS MOA and that are operating in a DCPS building are exempt from the licensure requirement in order to operate before and after care. You still need to go through the process if you want to accept subsidies, but you no longer need to go through the process if you're just interested in running before and after school programming in the same building. We did an information session with them last year, and so that is linked here as well. All right, last but definitely not least, we have a couple reminders about hosting events at DCPS schools, as well as our data request process. So we love when partners bring exciting opportunities to our schools and students, but we just want to make sure that we are following proper protocols so that we are aware when folks from outside of our schools will be on campus, and that we can also support and amplify the great work of our partners and schools. So if you are planning an event on DCPS property featuring DCPS students, please contact us first, even before you reach out to the school. That's really important so we can help make sure that folks are aware of what's going on, teams are available to support, etc. Our office, the Office of External Affairs, will provide approval for the event. And then depending on the scale of the event, we are also happy to support coordination that elevates and amplifies the event itself. If you would like media to attend or cover the event, first, again, contact my team. Media must be chaperoned by a member of the DCPS press team. So it's really important that we're looped in on the front end, again, so we can make sure that they're available to support when the event is happening. The DCPS press team will work closely with the school administration to coordinate a plan to designate students without DCPS media releases. Families should not be signing any other media releases. I'll share a little bit more about how our release applies in these situations. And then if you observe media on site during your programming at your school, even if it's like doesn't have to do with you, that's also something we would ask that you flag for us so that we can follow up. The DCPS media consent form is something that it's included in the DCPS enrollment packet. So all families have access to it. And it extends to include our partners. So any partner that wishes to photograph or record a DCPS student as part of their program needs to ensure that the student has a signed consent form on file with their school. And with a signed DCPS media consent form, partners can use student media like image, recordings, artwork, written work in their program's promotional materials, so long as the student media being used does not disclose any of the student's biographical or identifying personal information. So the theme of this slide is please reach out to us first at the inception of the event idea, and we will help make sure all the T's are crossed and I's are dotted so that we can have a successful engagement. And finally, data requests. So if you want to, there's two types of data requests. If you're doing formal research, that actually goes through our data team and is a slightly more complex process. If you are submitting a non-research data request, you email the following information to the DCPS partnerships team. So that would be a copy of current FERPA release forms for each student whose data you are requesting. So FERPA forms typically expire 1 year from signature. So please make sure that as part of your annual enrollment or re-enrollment process, you're having families complete updated versions of this form, because we cannot accept expired forms. If you work with high school students, as soon as a student turns 18, a valid form that their family or parent or guardian signed becomes invalid, and you need one with their signature on it. So you would send the FERPA forms, a description of the data you're requesting and how it will be used, and then an Excel spreadsheet. Please don't send us Google spreadsheets because we cannot access them, with the following information. So one column would be student name. Next column would be student ID if you have it. If you don't have student ID, date of birth is also works well. The data team needs this to make sure that they're pulling data for the correct student. And if there are students with the same name, they can't always provide data on them if they don't have that additional piece of information. The current school or previous school for the student you're requesting, and then one column for each additional piece of data. So it might be that you're looking for, Q4 grades or park scores. So for each data element that you're asking about, it would get its own column. So you send all of that to us. We review it, we cross-check all the FERPA forms, and then submit it to the data team. Its typical turnaround is 30 business days from when we submit it to the data team. It is just me who does this check right now. So if I get leading up to the start of the school year, we often get a lot of requests. It can take me a little bit of time to get through, particularly if you're asking for data for, 150, 200 students. I am individually checking each and every FERPA form. So as much lead time as you can give me as possible, the better, and it's very much appreciated. All right, so now I just wanted to share a quick highlight of our summer building use preview, as Katie mentioned. So for any organization that is independently operating during the summer, Katie, you can click to the next slide. They will need a building use agreement unless you're part of centrally managed summer learning programming through DCPS. You do need a building use agreement. This is the same as in years past. The deadline this year for submitting your summer building use application is April 24th. It does need a principal signature and needs to be submitted to the Department of General Services Realty Office. The window for summer programming is June 22nd through July 31st. So any programming that you hope to offer at a DCPS school, even if it's independent of DCPS programming, needs to fall within those windows. And then lastly, if you're interested in providing afternoon enrichment programming as part of DCPS's K-8 summer school program, please contact the extended learning team. But please note that DCPS does not have additional funding to fund that PM portion. We will be hosting our usual summer building use training on Monday, February 23rd at 1 o'clock. We will send out a save the date and registration, but for folks who are joining today, wanted to give you that information so that you can pencil it in. A couple reminders about our systems and resources. The partnerships website is great. We work very hard to keep that up to date with all relevant information. We put, this is where all of our trainings live, all of our very detailed step-by-step guidance on how to complete every process that we've talked about today. So if you have questions, this is a great place to start. It also has resources like our school partnership toolkit, which is a great resource to use to norm with your school partners on important aspects of your partnership, like how are you going to share space, and what are the school's priorities, and how can you fit in to support them. So I think, as we're already starting to think about next school year, maybe you're thinking about starting a new partnership, or you want to sort of restart an existing partnership and renorm, this is a great resource. It's broken up into single page topic guides, so you don't have to wade through a bunch of stuff to get to what you're looking for. It has resources and best practices built in, so definitely take a look. We also have a link to our database. This is where you have your partner profile when you completed your registration. This is where you let us know which schools you're working with, how you can file incident reports, accommodation requests. So for all of our reporting needs, that is definitely something to favorite on your browser. And then lastly is our resources page within our website, again, which will help you access things like the School Partner Toolkit or recordings of today's training. So with that, we can put our contact information up, and then I have not been watching the Q&A because Katie's been handling all of that. And so I'm just going to take a look now and see if there's anything left that hasn't been answered.
I do just want to say again, I've seen a couple questions about if we'll be sharing the deck and the recording. Yes, as Abby mentioned, no expectation that you will memorize all of this. It's a lot of information. So we will be sharing both.
I see a question about videotaping students during activities. I think it likely depends how you're using that footage. But yes, if you plan to use footage of students in any sort of public way, we do need to make sure that they have a signed DCPS media release. That's something the school has. So typically, if you know, when it's for an event, what we'll do is we'll bring lanyards. Students that don't have a release will wear the lanyards, and then we'll ensure that anyone there, either from an external communications team or from a media outlet, knows who those students are and doesn't video or photograph them. But that's why it is so important that we are aware of events and able to join, because it's a lot to manage that and the program and students. And so that's what we're here for. So we tag team that with our press team to make sure that that's not something, that's sort of falling to you or the school.
I see a few questions here that I don't think we responded to, comments. So one is, remind me how long the MOA lasts. Typically, MOAs are 5 years unless it says otherwise. So although it's a long process, once you have it, it's good for 5 years. And then the other one I saw is, please share more details about the donation agreement. That process is incorporated into the MOA process. So once you start that, you'll receive more information. If you have a one-off donation, then I will link to our website where you can submit that.
Our DCPS clearance is needed for a staff member that only participates in one visit to a school. So generally the requirement for clearance is a one-time visit to an on-campus event where you're chaperoned by a cleared DCPS staff member. You do not need a clearance. I would say, I don't know the particular context of this organization, but if you have program staff who are rotating around, I think odds are over the course of the year, they may be going back to a school more than once. So the safest thing to do is just to have everyone cleared, but that threshold is one time. Are there instances where a school would have their own field trip form policy? We have some school leaders that insist they need a field trip form for standard after school events. It is certainly possible that schools have different interpretations of the policy. So if you have a particular issue popping up, if you can email us the details and then we can help figure it out. I think if you are hosting an event like an after school event on campus, you wouldn't need that form, but we have certainly gotten questions from schools when a partner is taking a group of students off campus, wanting to make sure that policy is being followed. And so we can help clarify whether or not that trip is considered DCPS sponsored and sort of what the right course of action is. A question around our capacity to contact media to support with events or provide a photographer. So we certainly have done that in the past, again, depending on the event. So again, just another plug for getting in touch with us early. That's part of what this process includes, is us sort of evaluating the opportunity and thinking about how we might be able to plug in and support.
I've seen a couple questions about school program providers using Language Line. So you can certainly use Language Line. I saw a question about posting Language Line on your website. I'm going to check on that to support with applications. So we'll follow up on that question. But you can certainly use Language Line.
I see a question around, if organizations can use their own media release or if it has to be DCPS, the DCPS waiver. If there's certainly the sort of like clearest threshold is if it's happening in a DCPS school, then the DCPS media release is really going to be the thing that we care about being in place. We know that organizations have their own events offsite, unrelated to DCPS, where you might need an additional, you might need something that covers your own operations. But certainly for things happening on our campuses with our students, it is that DCPS media release we're focused on. The clearance requirement applies to all program providers, even if you're virtual. So if you are providing regular services to our students, even if it's virtual, you do need to complete the DCPS clearance process. A question about visits. So like whether, I know folks bring funders on to schools to see programming. I think what we're most concerned with are events that have any sort of media or even if it's not a media outlet, if you're going to bring like your communications team to take photos or do videography, if you're inviting any local leadership or what we would consider to be VIPs. So sometimes the superintendent will be invited because the part of the programming is funded by an OSSE grant, right? Like we would need to know that. Council members, the mayor, certainly. We've had a couple instances where the mayor's invited to one of our schools. So those are the things that we really want to be looped in on. I think a simple funder tour is not necessarily something we need to know about, but certainly something you would want to make sure that the school is aware of, that you have appropriate coverage so that individual is always chaperoned while they're on campus. And again, because I know we're not giving like the super, super clear distinctions here, just reach out if you have questions, and we're always helpful to figure it out on sort of a case-by-case basis. Just taking a look at some of the questions that have come in. A question about security. So that's something that is determined during the building use agreement process. So partners are typically charged security if they're operating outside of regular school hours. This can differ depending on the provider, depending on in terms of like if they're offering free services to students, if they're, what other DCPS programming is going on in the building. But yes, as a general policy, partners are typically responsible for security and custodial fees if they're operating outside of regular school hours. Yes. Is there a particular person to reach out to for events? Me. You can email me directly. You can see my email in my background. It's up here on the screen. You can email Katie for sure, the partnerships inbox. Any three of those will make sure it gets to the right person. Right. Any final questions? See, someone has a hand up. The best way to get your question answered is to drop it in the Q&A or to reach out to us directly. All right. Well, if there are no more questions, we just a heartfelt thank you and gratitude for joining us today. Um, we know, this is a lot to manage, but it is really important, and we appreciate all your effort to meet these expectations and follow these processes. And again, just really want to emphasize that we are here to answer your questions and support you through navigating these processes. So please don't hesitate to reach out. That's what we are here for. Thank you for your services to our students. I know this week was probably pretty wild with all the snow, so hope everyone stayed safe and stayed warm. And we will see you in July to do this all over again. Thanks, everyone. Have a great weekend.